Please forgive the state of me and the setup today. Several things going on in my room, I can't use that, and also it's 30 degrees, so this is going to be fun, isn't it? It's been 18 months since Google launched the Pixel 4a 5G, the 4a's bigger brother. This phone almost competed with Google's own Pixel 5 more than anything, so should you still consider it for £250 used, or should you go with one of the newer models? Hey guys, I'm Ryan Thomas, and thanks to Vodafone for providing today's subject matter. I'm going to be reviewing the Google Pixel 4a 5G in 2022. Probably should point out that after this thing launched, a year after this thing launched, Google released the Pixel 5a. However, this was only in certain markets, I believe Japan and possibly the US as well, and you only saw a couple of changes over the 4a 5G. Definitely not big enough to go out and swap it out for an upgrade, or even to spend the extra dosh on the 5a. So if you ever see a 5a out there, just know that it's not available in a lot of regions, and it wasn't a huge upgrade over the 4a 5G. So for £250, it makes sense to look at the 4a 5G. The spec sheet is pretty meh, simply because this was never aiming to be a flagship smartphone. It's got a Snapdragon 765G, 6GB of RAM, 128GB of storage, sub 4000 mAh battery, 3 total cameras, and a 6.2-inch 1080p 60Hz OLED display. It didn't knock your socks off back then, and it certainly doesn't now, but is it enough to get you going? Well, before we get into that, let's talk about the things that you don't really see on a spec sheet, but that actually make a big difference. This thing has terrific haptics, very crisp, a nice textured polycarbonate body, a punch hole camera, and mostly flat sides to the display. Also, a Ryan Thomas video about one of these couldn't go any further without mentioning the proper capacitive fingerprint reader on the back. Sure, it might not seem as futuristic or as elegant as the more modern offerings, but it's way more reliable and a lot quicker too. This phone doesn't feel or look as premium as the Pixel 4 or Pixel 6, but isn't actually that far off the Pixel 5. The 5 didn't have the headphone port, nor this larger screen, so in some ways this does one-up that. But of course in the build quality and display department, the Pixel 5 one-ups the 4a 5G, so it really does come down to personal preference and what you prioritise in a smartphone. This review unit hasn't suffered any major damage and looks to be in decent condition. I like the feel of this thing in the hand. I don't feel like it needs a case. You might want to put one on if you're really trying to baby the thing, but the whole point of the 4a 5G is it's not a super hyper premium, easily crackable glass smartphone. It's made of fairly rugged polycarbonate, another word for fancy plastic, and whilst it does scratch easily, I feel like at this price it's really not going to matter. It is much more worth having a nice feeling phone as opposed to something that's going to resist scratches. Alternatively, you could put a skin on it if you're worried about scratching. I don't have any kind of sponsor or any reason to tell you to go out and buy a skin, but it's just something that I might consider on a phone like this. The 60Hz OLED screen isn't anything to write home about. If anything, it does kind of show its age. Most smartphone displays run like 90 or 120Hz panels these days, which feel smoother to operate, sure. The 60Hz panel doesn't really worry me personally because I'm not too fussed about smartphone refresh rates. I mean, I have a 240Hz panel for my PC and I definitely feel the difference there, but on a smartphone, I'm really not doing enough to really warrant 120Hz. So as long as you're not a super gamer or really into your tech, then 60Hz is going to be more than enough. The colours are nice, the screen gets bright enough, it's an otherwise very nice display. Not that you'd be making most out of those hertz either, because you've got a Snapdragon 765G and 6GB of RAM. They're pretty meh specs, honestly. Performance in your typical social media browsing and web surfing is still decent. There are a few hiccups here, it's definitely not flawless, but to be honest, it's very, very usable even 18 months later. Gaming isn't so much, so you can play your Candy Crush and your 2D titles absolutely fine, but 3D titles this thing is going to struggle with. It's definitely not the worst thing in the world. I mean, I can show some B-roll of me actually playing games on it. It runs, but it's just not your gamer's smartphone. Something that Pixels do exceptionally well, on the other hand, is software, and the 4a 5G is no exception to that rule. Pixel experience looks and feels very satisfying to use thanks to the animations, but also just the crisp haptics. It feels very cohesive and almost like Google made this hardware with the software in mind. Google has fallen behind somewhat in delivering timely software updates. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're not years out of line, but Samsung has caught up and is sometimes delivering actually quicker updates than to some Pixel owners, which is kind of nuts. That said, you still should get at least one more platform upgrade, if not two, and if you really want to, I mean, the Pixel 4a 5G is a good platform for you to mod if you ever feel like you want to run Cyanogen or Lineage OS or anything like that. I say Cyanogen, I mean, it's the year 2022, right? What are you talking about? Battery life is one of the 4A 5G's best traits. With a decently large battery, good software, and of course low power components to go with it, you can expect at least a full day out of one of these, even from the used market. For me, someone who doesn't use their phone nearly as much as a lot of other people, I could get 2 days out of this. Granted, that's not when I'm constantly using the headphone port because I've missed it so much, but mainly if I'm just using it as I normally would any other smartphone, I get 2 days. The excellent pixel camera experience is offered here with a 4A 5G, and for the main camera point and shoot setup, this is one of the better setups for £250. It's very reliable, it's able to take good photos pretty much every time you tap that shutter button. I like Google's Color and HDR these days, it's quite contrasty, it's quite almost realistic, I quite like that. And the 4A 5G brings that to the ultra wide as well. Now, the ultra wide isn't quite as good as the main camera, but honestly, it doesn't do too bad for the price, and I feel like you can get some nice shots with it. The 4A 5G takes fantastic photos and videos to the point where it's almost unfair to compare to other smartphone makers at this price range, and it's all thanks to that great software. And overall, the 4A 5G is a good smartphone in 2022. It's not going to knock your socks off, it's definitely not a super high-end flagship smartphone, but if you want something that does everything pretty well, good screen, decent performance, great battery life, great cameras, your headphone port still in there, your physical capacitive fingerprint reader still in there, all for a decent price, you really can't go wrong. This isn't the sort of phone to last you another 5 years, but if you're sort of in between contracts or you're looking for something to just tide you over the next couple of years, this should do you just fine. And with that, I want to thank Vodafone for sending out today's subject matter. I really appreciate them sending out smartphones. And yeah, again, sorry about the setup. There might be a bit of echo, I don't know. And the light is, changing all the time. I currently don't have access to all of my other stuff. But hopefully you enjoyed the video nonetheless. So leave me a comment if you could and hit that like and subscribe button. Please do check all the links in the video description along with my social media. I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you later. Peace.